Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and with it being pretty much a year since the Farage riots kicked off, I like to do a few discussions on how we got to the point where people wanted to violently kick their own communities down and call it patriotism. Now, I'm going to be explaining the devices that Nigel Farage and others have used to stoke this hatred this summer, but first let's begin with a preview by looking at something Donald Trump said when he arrived in Britain on his personal visit to Scotland at the weekend.
Immigration, you better get your act together, or you're not going to have Europe anymore.
So let's take a look at the rhetoric and the reality. But first, for daily news and politics, please click the subscribe button to stay notified. So it's fair to say that Donald Trump doesn't really know what he's talking about. During his press conference yesterday, he was asked about a Scottish independence referendum, and he mistook the last one for the Brexit referendum. And that wasn't even his worst answer. When asked about interest rates, something he frequently talks about, he responded by talking about how he renovated the ceiling of his golf club.
Millions of dollars in surrounding a railing underneath the area that you're painting. I mean, I've never seen that like that. Brand new, beautiful plywood, very expensive, wrapped around a figurine or a railing.
Make it stop. So, if people thought Biden had senior moments as president, that's nothing on Trump's rapidly declining cognitive functions. But Trump still utilises what's left of his brain into pushing disinformation in order to mislead people into turning on one another, whilst Trump and his ilk rob them blind in the confusion. Here's what he said about immigration in Europe.
Immigration, you better get your act together, or you're not going to have Europe anymore. You got to get your act together. And we, as you know, last month we had nobody entering our country. Nobody. Shut it down. And we took out a lot of bad people that got there with Biden. Biden was a total stiff. And what he allowed to happen, but you're allowing it to happen to your countries. And you got to stop this horrible invasion that's happening to Europe, many countries in Europe. Some people, some leaders have not let it happen. And they're not getting the proper credit they should. I could name them to you right now, but I'm not going to embarrass the other ones.
So, that word, invasion, powerful. It makes you think of an out-of-control, overwhelming force. And let's be clear, European countries are absolutely facing some huge and complicated political challenges with migration. Irregular migration has been on the rise, but what's the cause of the challenge? Well, it's a combination of disinformation affecting domestic populations and unstable politics and climate driving a refugee crisis. With Trump's on-again, off-again mate, Putin, driving a lot of that in parts of Africa and Eastern Europe, and he's also driving a lot of the disinformation within Europe itself. For instance, 2022, there were 5.1 million immigrants came to the EU from non-EU countries, which was more than double the number from the year before. So, oh my God, out of control. But what was driving it? The displacement of Ukrainian refugees. And whose fault was that? Whose fault was it that people needed to flee Ukraine at the time? Wasn't European governments for being weak on immigration. Might have been European governments being weak on Putin when he first began his nonsense, leaving him alone until it reached the point where he's literally trying to kickstart World War III. But Trump's use of the word invasion. Now, he's not the only one, of course. Nigel Farage, Suella Braverman, others have been using it on the far right as well. They've all used this terminology before him. But is that an invasion? So the term is a political choice. It's not a legal or a demographic definition here. It's a word meant to make you feel something rather than understand something. It's designed to make you feel a specific emotion, fear. Migration flows, even big ones, are handled through established systems for asylum and border control. In 2023, the EU issued over 3.7 million first-time residence permits. Now, those numbers don't show a continent that's been overrun against its will. It's a system that is processing, documenting, managing people. Invasion is supposed to imply it's being done to you rather than by you. It's designed to create a sense of fear, but also helplessness, a lack of agency. And populists feed on that. They want an audience that feel helpless and angry. And that's why they use that word. It's not an accurate word, because migration, regular and irregular, is still being directly managed by governments of the affected countries. Even illegal immigration, genuinely illegal immigration, is being managed by governments. So while Europe is definitely dealing with a serious and very politically charged migration situation, calling it an invasion that's killing the continent, that is rhetorical heat. It's not factual light. It's designed to create a sense of crisis that the numbers and facts on the ground don't back up. And that brings us to the next piece of the narrative. So this idea that Europe's leaders are just standing by and allowing all of this to happen, the insinuation is that they're weak, that they're not acting, that they're failing to protect their borders. The problem is that is not what's happening. In reality, the main political trend across Europe for years has been towards stricter immigration policies. The immigration policies have become stricter, not weaker. This isn't some brand new thing. The push for tighter restrictions has been happening for quite a few years now, before even these comments, especially after the 2015 refugee crisis through Europe. We're seeing it all over the place. The UK, France, Germany, Italy, they've all been tightening national policies. And you've then got countries like Hungary and Poland, which have already got some of the most hardline anti-immigration policies in the whole of the EU. And Trump himself, of course, sort of admitted this by saying, oh, some European leaders have resisted immigration, but they're not getting the credit they deserve. So the story that Europe as a whole is just passively watching its borders dissolve is not accurate. The reality is you've got a continent in the middle of quite a fierce, very messy debate with a clear political shift towards more control, not less. And it's also important to take note of what this rhetoric feeds on. So in Britain, for example, when Enoch Powell was pushing his hate, the focus was simply on the colour of a person's skin. That was it. He described it as a terrible thing to suddenly find yourself living next door to someone who was black. These days, that level of racism doesn't find enough support. So it's shifted to culture. They make one group of citizens afraid of another by talking about worrying cultural trends which don't actually exist. Ben Habib has just been trying to claim that the government is hiring someone to manage a Sharia court. Problem is, he's lying. A Sharia court is like a golf club committee. They cannot impose their rules on anyone who doesn't wish to be part of the club. If I don't want to follow a golf club's rules, which I don't join the golf club. If you don't want to follow a Sharia court's rules, you don't join the Sharia court. There's no compulsion in law. The job vacancy he was citing was a private listing, just like one you'd find for a golf club. It wasn't a government vacancy. He could have seen in the same place a vacancy for a golf club manager. Does that mean the government's hiring golf club managers? No, it isn't. What he's talking about is a website that the Department of Work and Pensions funds to advertise for private listings as well, to help people into work. They're just listing vacancies which employers send to them. It's not their own vacancies. But this is how the same divisive racism is pushed these days. It's not based on skin colour so much, although there are plenty of nods and winks to that as well. You know, people saying, oh, Rishi Sunak's not even English. When you just have to listen to him, it's like, are you kidding me? But through making those claims about cultural incompatibility, which are false. Okay, so the picture of Europe is not what's presented. But what about the other half of his story? Because Trump made another claim as well. He claimed that whilst Europe was fumbling, the United States under Trump built a perfectly sealed border, because this is really crucial. This is the anchor of the whole comparison. Let's hear it one more time first.
As you know, last month we had nobody entering our country. Nobody. Shut it down.
Nobody. Not a trickle. Not a reduced flow. Zero. That might be the boldest claim of them all. And it's also just, as you can expect, not remotely true. There's never been a modern time in American history where all border crossings, legal and illegal, however you want to define them, just stopped. I mean, you look at the actual numbers. So what Trump's referring to here is, so encounters at the border have dropped dramatically at certain times. They've never been zero. For example, there was a report from May 2025 that said 0 illegal immigrants were released into the US by Border Patrol. So that's a very specific figure. It's not the same as nobody entering the United States. Because in the same month, there were nearly 9,000, over 8,700 people who crossed various ports of entry. So even when Trump has claimed in the past to have, the safest border in the history of our country, it was often tied to a very unique set of circumstances, like he did it in April 2020. Mate, the world's locked down because of COVID. It's a bit like the Tories in this country when they're claiming, various types of crime had gone down in this point, like burglaries and stuff. Do you think that's because everyone's at home? Not a great time for burglars. The idea of a totally shut down border, it's a great political slogan, but it's not a political reality. But the hazard here is, in this country, like Nigel Farage is claiming he can have net zero migration. People think it's possible. Well, America is doing it. Why can't we? America isn't doing it. The southern border is almost 2,000 miles long, even with walls, tech, thousands of agents. Put what you like there. It's a living environment. People are caught. Some get through. Legal immigration and trade. They don't just stop. Claiming nobody came in erases the day-to-day border management that takes place. It just didn't happen. So if the claims don't match the facts, why make them? Why build this whole narrative of a collapse in Europe versus a locked down American utopia? That's the crux of the whole thing. This is really where you have to separate what is a real policy debate from political propaganda. A policy debate uses facts and data because it's trying to solve a genuine and difficult problem. Propaganda uses fear, simple stories, simple solutions, and loaded language to fire up a political base. Left or right, that's how populism works, and none of it is ever serious. Words like invasion, killing Europe, you're not going to have a country left. They're not meant to start a meaningful debate. They're designed to frame immigration not as a challenge that we need to manage, but as a threat we need to resist. It takes a hugely complex issue, one that involves economics, international law, humanitarian crises, and national security, and it boils it down to a simple story of fortress mentality, us versus them. This kind of talk isn't just for an American audience. It reflects and fuels a global rise in nationalistic policies. Of course, we've seen it in Europe, we've seen it in Britain, we're seeing it in Japan now as well. When you paint Europe as weak and failing, reinforces the message that only a certain kind of strongman leader can protect a nation's culture and its borders. It's a very powerful story. But as we've seen, it's a story that has to completely bend the facts to make the narrative work and shut out many other facts. And there's another consideration as to why immigration is becoming such a key issue for a lot of people. It's not just because there's a concerted effort by the far right, who are these days increasingly well organised, international and well funded to push the issue, although that is also true. It's because of population dynamics. In advanced economies, like many European countries, including the UK, we have had a declining birth rate for decades. Put simply, if we didn't have immigration, our population would now be in decline. Now, some anti-immigration people think this is good because they think a country has a fixed set of resources, like your productivity is like this fixed number. The money you've got is this fixed number. So if there are fewer people, that means each would get more. The way they think about it is the queue. Oh, I can't get a doctor because there's too many immigrants in the queue. No, the immigrants are actually at the end of it seeing to you. They're the doctors and nurses, right? But that's what they think. They think that if there's no immigration, there's fewer people, then you can get to the front of the queue quicker. It's like, no, because you'll also have fewer doctors and nurses. The queue will actually be longer, if anything. But that's what they think. You've got this fixed set of resources. But our resources are linked to productivity. Without immigration, our workforce shrinks. However, the proportion of retired people in the UK is increasing. So it's costing more money in pensions, in health and social care, and other things like the very topical winter fuel payments. It's all paid for by the taxes on working people. So if you have fewer working people, then you either doom retirees to poverty, or you have to squeeze those working people for more taxes, hurting their standard of living. So governments tended to boost our workforce in the only way they could, with immigration. Immigration also has other benefits. You're talking about mostly not fighting age men, but working age people. They've already been educated by another country. The vast majority will go back to their own country to retire. So we get the benefits of their labour without having to spend much on education or health and social care for them. But because we have a shrinking domestic population, in order to keep our economy going, we've had to increase immigration levels to the point where the far right have persuaded people it's out of control. And this creates a real dilemma. If governments get tougher on immigration, as they are doing, we constrict our economies because, as the Bank of England recently pointed out, the only economic growth we've had in the past few years has come from immigration. This is because the domestic workforce is getting smaller, but the retired population is getting larger. So we can get tough on immigration, allowing our workforce to shrink, hoping that AI can plug the gaps, and Labour have one trump card, no pun intended, in that because they're now invested in infrastructure, they can get a few quick wins on that. But long term, that's not going to solve the problem. And of course, if AI doesn't plug the gaps long term, we'll see a further squeeze on those resources which people think are fixed. Or we keep filling vacancies however we can to keep our economy rolling, but then suffer complaints that things will be much better without immigration. And the far right win either way. You know, if you restrict immigration, it won't be enough, by the way. And because the standard of living will carry on going down, they'll still blame that on immigration. And if you don't, if you carry on with immigration to boost people's standard of living, they'll say, well, there's too many immigrants. It's affecting. That's when they shift from the economic argument. So when the standard of living is falling, they can lean into the economic argument. When it's not, they lean into the cultural argument. And neither of them based on facts. The level of disinformation is such that serious governments now have a very, very thin line to walk with no margin for error. And because the problem is fundamentally caused by disinformation and lies, the only serious counter can be exposing it, conversations with people. But let me know what you think in the comments below. For more content, you could subscribe to the channel or even join for access to streams and behind the scenes updates. Thanks for watching, and until next time, I'll see you later.